Oh, that's just sad. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? Oh, better. I give it a 4. So while these guys are getting seated and doing their shuffle, I just want to briefly introduce what we're doing this morning. It's great to be back here in NANOG in San Diego. This morning we're going to have, is there a clicker up here? Here we are. Clicker. Okay. What we're doing this morning is we're having a keynote discussion, a panel on the IPv4 secondary market. And I know some of the folks here are going to say, hey, what's going on with this? Why are we having a discussion on the IPv4 secondary market when what we should really be talking about is IPv6, because we're network engineers and it's important, and v4 is so, 1998, and this is foolish. Well, the reason we're having this discussion is because IPv4 is still alive. It's going to be alive for quite a while. The question whether it's going to be alive for a year or 5 years or 10 years is going to be one of the subjects of discussion today. How it's going to change hands, why it's going to change hands, who owns IP addresses, what is the involvement of the courts, what should be the involvement of the RIRs, the regional internet registries. When a customer comes to you and says, I've got this IP address block and here's some money, do you route it or not? These are all really important questions that we're going to be talking about over the next 90 minutes or so. One of the things that I would like to urge to the greatest extent possible is, actually guys, some of you guys may want to move to this side, so there's only 2 microphones here, and there's more microphones here. Just, we want this to be as interactive as discussion as possible. And the reason I want these guys to have greatest microphone density is I also want you guys to have the greatest microphone density. When you guys have a question, when you have a comment, when you want to shout something out, please immediately come up to a microphone. We're not going to have as such a Q&A period. This is not going to be one of these presentations where everyone comes up, they give their presentations, everyone sits down, there's some anemic Q&A, and then we all go and eat lunch or start having drinks. Instead, what we're going to do, this is going to be a very passionate discussion. We have a very passionate group of people who care a lot, who have a lot of skin in the game on this very topic. There are a lot of passionate people in the audience. Our goal is to make this a great discussion and have a lot of interactivity, and for people to say what they think, and for the community to make some progress on this issue, rather than just having another, look, it's a pretty graph on a slide conversation. So now that everyone's in place, and all of that being said, I want to do a quick introduction to all the folks who are here. Let me start out with myself. My name is Dan Golding. I'm General Manager of Raging Wire Data Centers, carrier-neutral data center company. We've got data centers in Sacramento, California, and Ashburn, Virginia. It's great colo. Try it out. Moving on to the rest of our folks, we have John Curran, who's CEO of Aaron. We have Joel Yeagley, whose name I've been mispronouncing for 10 years, which I apologize for, with Zynga. We have Charles Lee with Adrex, who's somebody new to us, so he's going to take a little extra time to introduce himself, but he's someone who's been a key part of the drama that has been surrounding IPv4 address transfers. And of course, Jeff Houston, who is the guy whose webpage we've all been going to for the past 10 years or so to try to figure out when IPv4 address space will actually run out. He's kind of the IPv4 exhaustion sage, if you will. So with no further ado, if you guys would like to do some introductions, let's start with John.
Real brief. Oh, wow. Okay, John Curran, President and CEO of Aaron. You folks know me. I've been involved in the internet for some time. I ran a hosting company. I ran a couple of backbone companies. I was involved at BBN. In 1997, I was involved in the formation of Aaron, the American Registry for Internet Numbers, was chairman for 11 years, and I've been CEO for the last 2 years. Obviously, Aaron is involved in this because we run a registry, and when addresses change parties, we update the registry, and that's a little bit about what we're here to talk about today.
Joel.
Joel Yeagley. Currently I work for Zynga. I've been bumbling around NANOG since about 1997. For most of that time, I've been a consumer of IPv4 address space across several companies, and have had some involvement in the policy development process, but like most of you, I tend to be on the receiving end of allocations rather than the changing of the policy. Thanks.
Charles.
How you doing? I'm Charles Lee. I'm president of Adrex, and I'll be telling you a little bit about what Adrex does and how it's meaningful and is important to you. As far as a background, I've been in the internet space a long, long time. Things like running the NSFNet program for MCI, the transition to the commercialization with the competing backbones, went through the wars associated with commercialization of domain names, created VPNS infrastructure, which was the first backbone for Internet 2. Been in the space a long time. I am not a new entrant, and I am bringing a different perspective than you're used to hearing. I'm grateful there are no dinner rolls for you to throw. Please don't throw anything else, because what I will say will probably be somewhat at odds with what you have heretofore expected.
Can we switch to Jeff's slides real quick to the PDF? He's going to give us some framing data for our conversation. It's the PDF.
While we're waiting for the PDF, I'm Jeff Houston. I work with APNIC. We're the Asia-Pacific counterpart of Aaron. And up until April of last year, we used to be the folk who handed out V4 addresses in the Asia-Pacific region. Things came to a bit of a halt around April last year because we ran out. And now we run the registry for IPv4 addresses in the Asia-Pacific region, as well as the registry for V6 numbers and AS numbers. And that's a subtle change of work and is actually quite central to this whole concept of what are we doing and why are we doing it with V4. So while they're scrabbling to get the PDF, what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is basic economics. Because we're not where we're meant to be, and this is no longer a technical issue. For reasons that are probably much deeper and take much longer to go through, we didn't do what the technologists wanted us to do. We didn't do the complete flip of this world to V6 before we ran out of V4. We wanted to actually explore what exhaustion's all about. So now in Asia Pacific, we're doing that. This year, I confidently expect that the European registry, RIPE, will also do that, and the turn in North America will happen probably soon after. So now let's look at what this means in terms of demand and supply, the fundamentals of what markets are all about. The supply side of this industry used to be the registries, and they're coming to a natural halt. But for any market to exist, you've also got to have folk who want addresses. And the quick thing I wanted to go through now is trying to quantify what's the demand. How many addresses are actually needed by this industry? So let's make a few really, really radical assumptions. For the next 3 years, the market is going to do nothing about V6. Right now, 0.3% of end consumers naturally use V6. Let's assume that even over the next few years, nothing much changes. And if you're in the internet business, you're going to need V4. First assumption. Next assumption, that the past is a reasonable indicator of the future. That if I look at demand levels over the last 5 years, I can predict the next 2 or 3. And that thirdly, we can actually draw some trends out of there. So let's do some predictions. These are the 5 RIRs from the period 2005 through to 2015. Look at APNIC up on the top left. The blue line, supply, has hit rock bottom. This year we expect to make around 1.7 million addresses allocated from the pool of our last /8. The red line is the momentum of demand. China needs addresses, and it's all V4. So does India, so does Japan, so do a whole bunch of actually quite vibrant economies. The green line is the cumulative shortfall, the difference between demand and supply. Look at RIPE. Confidently expect that mid this year, RIPE is going to run out. Same kind of picture, even though there's been a little bit of demand over supply already because RIPE changed its allocation policy. RIPE now only gives 3 months worth of addresses, not 12. And there's already a pent-up demand growing inside RIPE. AREN, even stranger. Their whole interaction between policy and industry is difficult to actually quantify, but I've done my best there. Things will get tough by 2014 because AREN will run out. The only 2 RIRs that won't are LACNIC and AFRINIC. So where does this leave us? Next slide. Globally, by 2014, the annual shortfall will be 300 million addresses. But the cumulative shortfall, that yellow line, will be up to 800 million addresses. So basically, there's a whole bunch of folk who want addresses over the next few years. And what we're really talking about is what mechanisms are going to be used within this industry to satisfy that demand. So with that, I'll hand it back.
Thank you. And just as a, if we can switch back to the PowerPoint real quick, just as the other PowerPoint, just as an interesting counterpoint to the discussion today, just as a little bit of trolling, one thing that I did last night is Mr. Aaron Hughes, will you stand up and give us a wave if you're in the room? Okay, so there he is. So Aaron Hughes and I, at the bar last night, executed a contract where he sold me a /29 of IP address space. I believe this to be a legally valid contract for $20, which is actually pretty cheap. Aaron, I got you. And it's really cheap. We signed it, and there are witnesses, Avi Friedman and Guy Tal, MBA. Congratulations, Guy. So one of the questions today will be, is this a valid contract? Will Aaron sue me? And if not, why not? But so we'll leave this up here for the duration of the conversation. So, right. So no, not that Aaron, the other Aaron. So to start out the conversation, we've had some developments that have gone on over the past few months that most folks in the room are probably not aware of. They're extremely important to this discussion and to the evolution of the IPv4 address space, which will be with us for a long time. Charles, do you want to talk about what's gone on in the last few months?
Yeah, so bear with me for a moment. By means of introduction, I do want to thank you for being allowed to come here. It's really quite nice. As I said, our positions will be somewhat different, although I think you'll find more common ground than you expect. Adrex is a market reality. It is not a speculation. It has been long speculated that Adrex would exist, or companies like Adrex, but we exist and it is real and it is now.
What is Adrex?
I was just where I'm going. So Adrex is a marketplace for the exchange of number blocks, IPv4 number blocks. And we do that on a global basis. So what we do is we enable and facilitate those transfers. We are not speculators in that market. We do not buy number blocks and then resell them. We engage clients to each other and we facilitate it. That is a non-trivial exercise and has all kinds of complexity as a consequence of policies and other things which are introduced by third parties to those transactions. We are not the barbarians at the gate. We are deeply respectful and appreciative of all the work by all the members of all the entities which preceded us.
Charles, actually, you may be starting with a false assumption because this is an error. And I'm not sure people here actually think you guys are bad. How many people here think having market makers to enable the transfer of IPv4 addresses that aren't in RIR, how many people think that's good? Okay. How many people think that's bad? Okay, there's a couple. How many people don't care because they're using IPv6? Okay. So
okay,
that
fair
may
enough.
inform
Thank
your
you.
discussion.
Thank you. So the Internet's future is ironically a challenge. You're being victimized by your success. You've been very successful in expanding the IPv4 Internet to its present state, and that is to be applauded. However, what we do is we are addressing the shortfall, this gap that was just itemized. There is an enormous shortfall between supply and demand, and we are a means to bring those more into alignment. We are not the total solution. There will be technology components, carrier-grade NAT, what have you. There will be many people and many solutions necessary to achieve what's required. Our mission is to maintain the growth of the Internet, to enable companies to continue to grow their revenue-based services. We provide economic incentives to those companies with fallow or underutilized assets to put them into the market, to get into the hands of companies that need to grow or develop their businesses. On the other hand, we assist buyers with identifying and acquiring the rights and the number blocks that are associated. Number blocks now, unarguably, are assets. They are
Why?
They are revenue.
What has changed to make them assets?
They are revenue producing. Anybody that's operated an internet-based service knows that you generate revenues as a consequence of the number blocks. They are revenue producing. They are non-produced. You cannot create more IPv4 number blocks than already exist. The protocol is predefined. And they are virtual. You cannot touch them. If you take those three things and put them together, virtual, non-produced, revenue producing, you have described a corporate asset. That is not something for speculation. These are corporate assets. What is debatable are the rights that are associated. What we do is document those rights so that when an acquisition occurs, the buyer knows that it was the seller's to sell and what rights they are acquiring. That is a very important piece. We do have certain things which differentiate us from RIRs and other groups, one of which is we say that these assets are property, and that is a distinction. So,
Can I just interrupt for a minute? How many people here think IPv4 addresses are property, real property? How many people here think IPv4 addresses are not property? Interesting. How many people here have a different opinion about IPv6 addresses?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Interesting.
So one of the things which I was asked to speak about was when we facilitated the transaction from Nortel to Microsoft. We got engaged very early with the holder of the asset, Nortel, and we had to do a lot of work. It took 2,600 pages of documentation to establish that those were, in fact, the assets belonging to Nortel.
And to frame this up, Nortel was in bankruptcy. So this was an action for Nortel's bankruptcy trustees, transferring the addresses to Microsoft, right?
We were hired by Nortel to see, one, could they sell these assets? Two, how would they sell them? Three, to establish for the court that it was property that could be transferred for consideration. Those were the three component parts. And then, of course, the transaction itself.
And how big were the IP blocks, and what was the financial consideration at the end of the day?
There were 38, number blocks, none of which had the name Nortel Networks in the whois, none. So either we were perfect and hit every gap in the whois, or whois was not authoritative and couldn't be relied upon for ownership. So it took 2,600 pages of documentation and hundreds of man-hours to stitch together the chain of custody and the ownership certification process between the names and Nortel Networks, and then to present that compelling evidence to the court so that the court could in turn say, yes, these are the assets of Nortel to sell. And Microsoft viewed that through a data room and did their diligence, and they acquired those number blocks. The purchase price in that case was $11.25 per number.
And I know there was opposition. The last time I looked into this, there was significant opposition from folks like Aaron and also possibly from folks in the U.S. federal government. How much opposition actually emerged to this? Because this was essentially a declaration that IP addresses are property by a federal judge. How much opposition actually came out of it, and what was the sort of final disposition of the case?
There were two principal parties that were quite concerned. I'll let John speak to Aaron's concerns. They submitted some documents to the court. It wasn't a formal objection. It does not appear in the court record as such. There was a document that was written by an entity out of Canada that was concerned. It was withdrawn. So when you look at the court records, what you in fact find is that officially, legally, it was unopposed. And so the deal was done, and Microsoft acquired the rights and asset itself, and then chose to do with that asset what owners can choose to do. They, in fact, chose to enter into a service contract with Aaron subsequent to the sale.
Okay. And John, I know you've been wanting to speak. What is your perspective?
Everything he said is accurate, but perhaps not in full context. So yes, there were parties that objected, including Aaron. Aaron objected because our community has policies. Obviously, we have a market. There is an existing transfer market because of community policy. We have a limited market, though. It's not the open market that everyone wants. And it deals in rights to IP number blocks. And there's rights that overlap on a number block. The fact that you might be the exclusive registrant doesn't mean you can hide the block. The community has the right to see it.
John, just for
I'm going to get to Microsoft.
No, just for context before we go on, were these legacy blocks or not? Because that's important.
These were, actually, it's not very important, but they were legacy blocks. So Aaron actually filed with the court and said, Your Honor, this doesn't match what we need to do to update the registry. And the court said, that's interesting. And in fact, what happened is there was a period of time when we worked with Microsoft. And a subsequent amended order was filed, and Aaron withdrew objections. We said, that's fine, the amended order works just the way we expect. We've never been ordered by any court to update the registry contrary to community policy, in any court, in any standing. So we're happy to work with people who do transfers, and in fact, we've had a number of people who have shown up beforehand and said, I want to prove that I'm entitled to receive addresses, that I have documented need. We'll work with them before the transaction. But if they do a transaction on a napkin in a bar afterwards, as long as that transfer meets community policy, we're happy to update the records once you come in and apply.
So you said it being a legacy block or not doesn't matter, but if it's not a legacy block, you've got a signed contract with one of the parties already, right?
As it turns out, we actually run the entire database for the registry of the blocks in our region, both legacy and non-legacy. That's because the U.S. government sort of intent, as shown originally in our formation, and then also as shown by subsequent statements that say these should be multi-stakeholder, the policies by which these are managed in the region, all of them, should be public stakeholder, community-led, industry-led. So we've been running the database at Aaron on behalf of everyone because that's what we were asked to do.
Well, let me sharpen my question up a little bit. If these were not legacy blocks, would Aaron have had an easier time reclaiming them if there was a contract in place between Aaron and one of the parties?
There was no discussion of reclamation, and the request was a transfer request. It wouldn't matter whether it was legacy or non-legacy. It's whether or not it meets the policy the community set. Right now, as long as you have a need for address space, and the current policy is 12 months, but the Aaron Advisory Council has recommended up to 24 months of address space based on your need extrapolated for 24 months, then we'll approve the transfer from a party that wants to sell them to you.
I suppose that the bigger question here is, at this point in time, does Aaron feel that the court's decision made this property that parties can transfer without Aaron's consent?
Oh, no, it certainly didn't. I mean, the amended order basically made no impact on Aaron. Aaron was not a party to it, and it stated that it actually said it was subject to the amended sales order, and it recognized that Microsoft entered into an agreement with Aaron prior to that actual transaction being consummated. The court recognized that Microsoft worked with Aaron before they consummated the deal.
So do you feel that Aaron's position is, since this court decision, is the same, stronger, or less strong in relation to your stewardship of IP addresses?
We're actually in very good position. There's, as I said, no court. We've had courts that actually have ruled a sale and then said Aaron should update the database. And we go back to court and we say, okay, it's the community's database run by their policies. Do you want us to actually do that? Because we're supposed to follow the community policies. We've actually had court orders revised to state whatever the parties have done, it doesn't affect Aaron, and someone has to pursue independently against Aaron if they want them to update the database.
Charles, what's your perspective on this?
Almost completely out of phase. First of all, there is a huge difference between legacy and non-legacy blocks. Legacy blocks predate the creation of Aaron. The then CEO of Aaron testified in court that those blocks which preceded Aaron's creation, Aaron had no control or authority over them. That makes sense. Legacy blocks, unless they're bound by a service contract, have nothing to do with Aaron. Aaron operates a database, and in that database they make listings, and that's that. there is no contractual relationship between the holder and Aaron, then there's no contractual relationship. If there is a contract, then the contract rules. So Aaron has service contracts, and those service contracts have rules and laws and governance issues within them, and one of which changed in the summer of 2003, was the introduction that there were no property rights associated. Up until that time, they were completely silent to the fact. After that time, the service contract says that the block holder does not have property rights. So if you have a service contract and the service contract says you have given away your property rights, then you don't have any. If you don't have a service contract and you have property rights, then you have property rights. Rights are what it's all about. And those which have property rights have higher market value than those which do not. That sort of makes sense. As far as the other issues, the courts have said these are property. I think they're property. Microsoft exercised their judgment and chose to enter into a service contract. I don't know what that contract says. It's private. It's not published. I don't know the content of that contract. So I don't know if Microsoft, subsequent to the deal, ceded away their property rights or not. I don't know. Maybe John could tell us.
Just when you say these are property, recognize if you're saying parties have assets which are their rights to the number blocks, I got no problem with that. You have rights to the number blocks, and those rights can be assets. But when you say you use the word property, it implies something else. It says you can transfer this as you wish. You can write a napkin in a bar. It's freehold property, right? And so that would imply that there's these numbers that exist that somehow are being sold independent of their registration, that there's an inherent right that you have to numbers that doesn't have to do with the fact that these numbers have been allocated according to how the community wants them. Let me finish. Thank you. You're the moderator, right?
I'm the moderator.
Thank you. So the fact of the matter is that if 1,000 people write those and put them in their pocket, 1,000 people have bought something, I don't know what, but none of it shows up in the registry. And ultimately, you guys have a registry because you want those numbers issued and tracked in one particular manner. So if you want to have numbers that comply with the way the community wants the numbers tracked, then you're going to have to deal with the registry that follows those policies.
Joel, you're an operator, and you're an operator with a company that has with Zynga, which has a voracious appetite for new servers and presumably for new IP addresses. What is your thought about V4, and what is, how does this discussion inform your strategy decisions, and what are you going to do for your appetite for IPv4 addresses over the next couple of years? And does everyone here know what Zynga is? Yeah, people know what Zynga is. You guys suck up IP addresses like a Hoover. What are you guys going to do?
So first off, I'm going to not speak for Zynga.
Okay.
And second of all, I think I'm going to redirect that in a slightly different direction, which is to say that internet content providers in general, and in fact most people who come to Aaron for IPv4 addresses are not actually consuming them at a ferocious rate. They are consuming them at a fairly steady rate, in fact, and to the extent that that demand will go unmet, it's going to have to be satisfied from somewhere. So new entrants to the IPv4 address market and existing entrants who are not ISPs still come to the well with a great degree of frequency. Thanks to lovely Aaron's statistics, we can see that since like 2005 or so, 30 to 40% of the people who come every year are requesting their first prefix. And those guys get between 1% and 4% of the address space allocated in a given year. So those are small assignments, but they're kind of necessary because that is driving new business growth. It's driving people who are renumbering out of PI space, PA space, and that's new value creation on the internet. A lot of the people in the room here are mature adults, and you go back for prefixes every at whatever your ARIN minimum is or whatever your regional minimum is, and you see IPv4 addresses as the engine of continued growth. But you also have a lot more address space which you're sitting on, and you'll probably dice that up into smaller and smaller pieces over time, and a significant portion of your demand will come from, or will be satisfied through efficiency rather than needing to acquire those address space from somewhere else. So if I'm going to jump to my concerns, those 40% of the users who come to ARIN for the first time every year, for example, and this is a similar experience in other RIRs, although not with the exact same number, are not well represented in the policy development process, if at all. In part, that's because they didn't need addresses before, the entities may not have existed, and their requirements are such that when you're registering a block and paying $1,200 and then 100 some odd dollars per year to maintain your registry entry, it's not your primary business to be involved in the management of global IPv4 address space. I see the potential for the policy development process and the RIRs themselves to be captured by the participants that have large business incentives to do that. So those people are large ISPs, for example, who have a significant reason to invest in the policy development process. That is the participants in the address transfer market from the perspective of brokers, and I think that's entities that don't currently exist, but I fear will exist because IPv4 transfer and title are actually kind of hard and still have a lot of uncertainty. And so what I am suspicious will exist in an IPv4 transfer market is in fact rents. And so the title for address space will sit in one place and the user will be in another place. And that has, I think, significant potential for impact both on in the routing system and elsewhere in the market. We can see, for example, examples of marketplaces where rents occur that economists love to hate, where there are also finite supplies of resources. And so one of the ones that I would point out to that has a lot of study behind it is New York taxi medallions. And you can buy one in the open market for about $1 million right now. And that's kind of a lot of money if your goal is to drive a taxi. But if you are interested in securitizing taxi medallions for investment purposes and leasing them to people who drive taxis, that actually looks like kind of a good investment. So I don't think that the IPv4 market would pan out exactly that way, but I have concerns that capture of the regulator might lead to something like that. We're in the early days of a secondary market. We can see transfers beginning to happen. One of the requirements, I think, for a vital secondary market is, one, transparency. That is, we have to be able to see the transactions that occur because that is a piece of knowledge that helps establish price discovery Without that, this is essentially a proprietary market. And as we can see with credit default swaps, there are some issues there. The other question in vibrancy is liquidity. If there are very few trades or there are heavy impositions on your ability to trade, then the market itself is vulnerable to, for example, significant price shocks, because every transaction is sort of a unique entity, and this has a serious impact potential for new entrants. So new entrants are still going to have to get IP addresses from someplace. When they can't go to the RIRs, they're going to have to go to this new market. This affects your ability to raise capital to start a business when you don't know how much the resource that you're going to need to run your business is going to cost. It affects how you build the business because, for example, if your choices are entering into an uncertain market versus going to a provider that already has address space for a fee, those are going to be different considerations. I don't see a lot of alternatives to this. So one of the things that I actually expressed concern about in this room, well, not in this room, but in the NANOG meeting in Albuquerque, which would have been in 2007, is the potential for a deep freeze. That is, everybody in the in-game for IPv4 is sitting on the addresses that they have. Transfer is hard, and in order to get addresses to run your business, you need to go to a provider. RIRs and the people who participate in them have explored non-market-based approaches. The existing transfer model, essentially demonstrated need, is a non-market-based approach. In theory, that works. In practice, the idea that someone would return address space that they might potentially need in the future is a pretty hard one to come up with if they have no way to allocate it in the near term, right? It's relatively easy for me to continue to justify through demonstrated utilization, existing address space. If I give it up, I may not be able to get it again from the RIR unless it can be demonstrated that a non-market-based approach actually produces, a pool of addresses that is sufficiently large. So I don't actually see that as likely, and it could be that I'm just uncreative. But I don't see that as a likely outcome. So I come to this ultimately fairly agnostic. I see problems with the potential for a market, but I don't see a lot of alternatives. Thanks.
So, Jeff?
Come on, scarcity and fairness are not synonyms. We've run out. Fairness is now gone. What we used to do was give everyone, whoever came at our door, addresses. Here you are, have as much as you need and a bit more. And while abundance was there, this was easy. We were fair because we gave everyone more than what they needed. We've run out. That policy doesn't work. We can't sustain that. So now if I've only got 3 addresses in the piggy bank and 5 of you come up, who's more deserving? And why should I, as an RIR, even try to answer that? I don't have a clue. So how do I, if you will, help the market do whatever it's meant to do? The only thing I could do responsibly is to say, I'll run the registry, you sort out who needs it more than the others. And that traditional response is actually through markets. The current registry system only worked as, if you will, an allocation mechanism while there was abundance. As soon as we ran out, that bit of the equation disappeared with it. And this whole sort of shock of the industry, oh my God, what do you do now? I'm sorry guys, it's just money. Sort out need by the basis of who bids the most. Was that $20 fair or not fair for eight addresses?
I think I did pretty good.
You were done, mate. The current price would be in the orders of hundreds, if not thousands, for that block.
But is it a routable block? Does routability make a difference?
Routability is going to be interesting as we get a routing economy to also sustain it. So at the moment, you're going to spend $20 on the addresses and a few thousand to get the thing routed. That equation might well change in future, because the one thing that gives inside all of this is the pressure on the routing system to route fine-grained fragments is going to get hard. It's going to get extremely high.
Avi Friedman.
Okay, Mike?
I think there's definitely an interesting relationship between the who-is data, the registry data, especially for the legacy space, and my question comes back to the sort of legacy space, and what people will do with routing and the authentication of routing. Because I think there is going to be a big pressure on the routing table. I think we could even see the need to rent address space be related to people actually building overlay networks on top of the net to make sure that people hear your address space. Because we will have this problem in the routing table, but how do you actually start dealing with that when you don't know whether what's in there should be there? How do you charge for slots if you don't know that the legacy of what's been routed is actually correct? So very, very interesting discussion. Question comes back to the gentleman from Adrex when he was talking, and I'm not a lawyer, so let me get the words right. I have an asset that may or may not be property, and the asset of this V4 space, let's say I have legacy space, that there's an assertion that it actually is property. At least I have no contract with Mr. Aaron that says that it isn't. But I still have a problem if I engage in a transfer for more address space than the community has said through policy that I actually deserve. And so my question is, what is the mechanism right now if I engage in a transaction, let's say through Adrex, and I wish to pay the market price for more address space than there's any chance that I'll use or could justify that I would use, even writing automated ping responders and such to convince to fool Aaron. What is my recourse for getting Aaron to update their database if they say no, given that that is important not only for operation, also there's some relation to routability. How would that work if there is a market and I can buy space, but they, the people that actually have to update the database, who I do not have a contract with, how do I force them, encourage them, pay them, bribe them to get that reflected? That's my question.
Well, the question of updating the listing in John's database is a question best answered by John.
So it would not get updated?
We'd qualify your need, we'd update the block for that much, we'd tell you, you probably shouldn't buy more than that until you work with the community to change the policy for a bigger.
Okay, so you'd work with me to say, here's how much we think you need, we'll reflect your registration to that degree, and if I can come back and demonstrate that I've used more, you would expand that.
Yeah, I mean, we only recognize what the community tells us to, so unless you want to work first to change the policy, we're only going to update the database to acknowledge transactions that match it.
But that's actually a pretty good result for people who want to buy extra address space because they can use what they have and they've reserved the ability to grow into more.
Just to ask that question a slightly different way, if I buy a /16 from someone, but I can justify, a /20 of that, can I go to Aaron and get a /20 of that transferred to me, and the rest of that /16 stays either in limbo or in the who is registry with the original registrant, or would you say we're not going to split blocks?
We'll split the block if it matches policy and transfer the 20 to you. We ignore the rest.
Okay. Interesting.
Unless the community tells us to do something else, that's what we have to do.
Okay, I'm sorry, but your database is never going to be accurate when you create incentives for people not to tell you what's going on. Security and stability of the internet requires that be accurate. If you create an incentive that says, oh, for goodness sakes, don't tell me that this is yours, because if you do, I'm going to try and take it away, then you're not serving the community need. You're in fact creating a disincentive, and you're demanding that the database become more inaccurate over time. That is silliness. I don't think that is anyone's idea of good stewardship.
Yeah. Please.
So we've been directed to recognize transfers of a certain size, up to 12 months. We actually just had the AC recommended policy to extend that to 24 months. That went to the board. They actually ratified that, so that'll be coming out this week sometime. But beyond that, there's a limit. So we have an existing market. It's just it's a limited market under ARIN policies. And that's easy to change, but you guys got to change it.
Okay, there's a second component piece here. And this is not a revelation to John, but I will state it so we have a nice debate going on here. There are potential market participants who are fearful of participating in the market. They're not fearful of what I do. They're not fearful of acquiring these things. They're fearful of retribution. They're fearful of retaliation. That somehow, if they participate in a marketplace, a third party, a non-participant in that contract, ARIN, or a PNIC, or some other RIR, will examine their existing inventory of allocations and reclaim some of them, or fail to give them an allocation in the future as a penalty for having participated in market. I really would like you to go ahead and set that fear aside for them and tell them that there is no linkage between participating in a market and retribution.
Case actually, ARIN specifically updated the last LRSA that came out last month to specifically say we don't reclaim, period. The LRSA 3 that came out last month, once you sign it, there is no cause for ARIN to do reclamation based on lack of utilization.
But here's a hypothetical. Let's say I go and buy that /16, and I come to you, and I have a real reason for the /20, and so you recognize the /20, you update the WHOIS database, but I've got this /16 that you guys, the rest of the /16 that you guys don't recognize. It's sort of sitting there. I'm probably not even using it yet, but then I go to ARIN and say, I want some more address space from you. Now, this is unlikely to occur, right? But in the case where this does occur, would you take into account that /16, which they have quasi-legally obtained?
We take what's registered to you in the database.
Okay. Did that answer your question?
The problem is that all of a sudden what's in the registry and what's in reality differ. The true value of an address is uniqueness. And the way in which we figure out that you're the unique holder of this integer is actually in a registry. But the registry only exists because all the rest of you consult that registry about that number. And the reason why you do so is that the registry is accurate. But all of a sudden, if we institutionally, in our meetings and in our policy procedures, start to make the registry inaccurate through deliberate omission of data, then we have a problem. Because where are you going to go to find out who actually has the current control over that number? So the weakness of this whole system here is trying to make the registry a bludgeon about industry behaviour. Don't do it. Leave the registry open to register reality and try and figure out how you want to enforce behaviours in a marketplace, and don't confuse the two, is my humble contribution.
Randy, yeah, sorry for the wait.
Randy Bush, IIJ, for instance. Dragon Research Labs, for instance. Excellently put. I think I can say it even more concisely. You're speaking as a regional internet registry. John is speaking as a regulator. And I am reminded of, showing my age, Bobby Dylan, his sin is his self-righteousness. We don't need the excuse of community policy for damaging our database. We don't need the excuse of well, I won't go down this path, I'll refrain. What we need is an accurate registry, right? And we don't need a regulatory body. We've got one.
Okay.
Randy, can I ask a question of you?
Want to ask another?
Just to follow up, given your needs, do you think that ARIN should set aside the community policy and just record all transactions? I know that might be difficult for us since we were
In
formed.
V4, you might as well. The game's over.
Okay, and would you be the...
I'm a Houstonite.
So-
The game's over. The stuff's gone.
Right.
You're
So-
sitting there trying to control stuff that just really doesn't make a difference anymore.
So how do we get the policy to reflect what you want?
Stop making all this policy crap.
Talk-
You've made a policy fracking industry with people flying around on airplanes and going to meetings and just doing a bunch
Right.
of useless crap.
So talk
Stay
to this
home
room.
and actually move packets.
You need
Perhaps
to
if I
talk to
could-
this room, Randy.
Perhaps if I could respond there, John, to both of you. How could you do that? Actually, APNIC had such a policy. The policy was if two folk came up to the registry and said, we've just done a deal, we were going to record it. We had that policy in place for about a year. And there was actually a large group of people who objected to that policy. They actually come from this community in this part of the world. And they managed to convince us over there in the Asia Pacific that unless we changed our policy to be more like Aaron's, we wouldn't have access to any of the address space in this market.
Right.
I'm not sure that served the global industry well. I'm not sure that that
extortion.
kind of pressure was actually the pressure that makes this internet work through this difficult period.
John, do you want to address that?
I think each region sets its own policy.
No, what happened, and Jeff is correct, and to uncloak, I was the chair of the address policy working group in APNIC during this phase, and I wish to differentiate between Aaron's staff and Aaron policy-making weenies. The Aaron staff was very integritous, took no positions, suggested no policies, et cetera, within APNIC. But Aaron policy weenies, who got flown there at Aaron's expense, were relentless in trying to create APNIC policy.
When you say Aaron policy weenies, do you mean operators?
No,
People-
I mean Aaron advisory committee members and board members.
Okay, but they're also operators, they're members of the community as well.
Some are, some aren't. Some are just pontificators.
Some seem to be hobbyists. Next question?
Hi, I'm Keith Mitchell, ISC. For the purposes of this question, I'm going to declare that I'm a member of the right arbitration panel. One of the things that right bank C's and RIR has done that I haven't seen the other RIRs do is to set up a dispute resolution process so that when people start fighting over IPv4 address space, there is a panel of people who make a determination as to who should get it. We kind of thought that it would, as the address space became more scarce, we would see more and more of these disputes. In practice, it's been steady, about one a year for a decade now. I'd be interested if the panel members had any thoughts on why this is happening. Is it, for example, because these things are being resolved in an open market and they're not actually getting as far as the dispute panel, or whether that's an appropriate model, or what interactions there might be between an arbitration process and an open market?
As number blocks become more readily recognized as assets with market value, that's a fairly new concept for a lot of people. It's not new to a lot of others. As that becomes more broadly known, there will be disputes, but I honestly don't believe an RIR is going to be in any position to settle it. I think it's going to occur in courts, because you're going to be talking about assets of significant commercial value.
Okay. Next question. From the right, or stage right?
Schiller, Aaron Policy Weenie. And a network operator. I work for Verizon.
And just answer your question, which Aaron office do you hold?
I'm an Aaron Advisory Council member, one of the policy weenies that gets flown around to argue about policy all over the place. So to the point about the policy that Jeff and Randy and John were going on about, what in the Aaron community, the policy that they were referring to is a policy that would let address space go into or out of the Aaron region. And what the Aaron community was very clear about wanting, and that the Aaron community is you people in the room here. If you showed up here, you're part of the Aaron community. So what the feedback that we got was that they didn't want address space to go to a region that did not have a needs-based allocation policy. They didn't want IPv4 address space to go to a region where someone could get it just because they outbid someone else in region or somewhere else. So the people wanted to maintain that justified need requirement, that people who were getting address space that were going to use it for themselves because to meet their own needs. That was the sticking point. And so, yes, as a result of, it was APNIC's decision. We didn't go and say, APNIC, you must change this policy or we're not going to pass this policy. You want resources from the Aaron region and you changed policy accordingly.
Okay.
It's a choice.
Let me ask a question to the crowd, and I'll try to make this as totally neutral as possible, because there's an assertion made frequently that the Aaron communities, this community, and by the Aaron community, I mean the set of people who regularly engage in public policy discussions, hold Aaron offices, all that stuff. How many people here feel that group, and I'm not sure how big it is in reality, how many people feel that group is representative of this group in the network operator community? How many people feel it's representative? Okay. How many people feel it is not representative? Okay. So hardly anyone answered.
Can I ask a different question?
Yeah, sure.
How many people in this room think they're part of the Aaron community?
That's a great question. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think that, so if you just don't care, then go back to doing your work and whatever, and we'll get to a presentation later that you care about. But if you care about it, even if you only care about one part or one particular policy or you have some particular need that you feel that needs to be met, then participate for that. Like, find an Aaron AC member, find someone, not saying that you have to join the mailing list and getting to epic battles about policy. Just find someone who participates and have your opinion be heard, because policy gets passed and it affects what your business can do, it affects what you can get, it affects how much address space you can get, all of that. And
next question.
Bill, can I jump to you for just a second?
Yeah. Well, if Mr. Woodcock will yield for 5 minutes.
Lucy Lynch, Internet Society, former paying Aaron member. Former paying Aaron member.
Okay.
I don't hold an allocation. My membership was taken away. I can no longer vote. I had a deep and long interest in both Aaron policy and in the DNS and in number assignment. I am without a voice in Aaron.
Okay.
To be clear, what Lucy's referring to is accurate to some extent. Aaron changed it so that to be an Aaron member, you had to hold number resources, okay? And because
you had to be a current number resource holder.
Right. But the policy process is open to anyone. Anyone can comment on policies, anyone can work on policies, but someone who doesn't have number resources cannot be a member and therefore can't vote to elect AC members and board members.
I find that astonishing. A fairness doctrine that says those that have will decide the future of those that do not. That doesn't sound right to me. It doesn't sound right that a member organization will dictate to non-members what their rights may be. When a steward begins to dictate the rights to people that are not their members, they cease being a steward and start being a dictator. You cannot impose your will on those who are not your members, and you cannot deny them access to an open market. That just won't work. Before we go on, though, I'd like to point out that needs assessment fundamentally harms everybody. It harms the seller because it produces a situation where their asset is not properly valued in the market. Non-member sellers are in fact in a better position than member sellers. So you create an incentive for people not to be part of your community. Similarly, non-member buyers have an advantage over member buyers. You are in fact creating incentives for people to cease being members and to move outside of your community. That is not something you should encourage. However, should you choose to do so, these people will do what's necessary because there is market incentive to do so. These people have to participate in the global marketplace. If that's what they need to do, they will.
Okay. Folks have been waiting patiently. Woody?
Bill Woodcock, back at Clearinghouse. So this is to Charles and Jeff, I guess. There are two things here I'm really having trouble understanding. We have a constrained resource, right? We all agree there are no more of them. You know, we are the community of people who need these resources to do our work. So why is it we want to let people who don't need them take them and not use them so that we can't get our work done?
Sure.
Why is it you want people who don't have a need to receive priority over people who do have a need just because they have more money? That's question number
Jeff,
one.
okay, what's...
Sorry, yes, I said it before and I'll say it again. It is very, very hard to be fair and deal with scarcity at the same time. This idea that somehow there's somebody out there in a registry who is capable of making such judgments perfectly all the time is a myth.
I don't care about being fair. I don't want to be fair to people who don't need them.
So
that's not of interest at all.
So at that point we get back into what is our core business as a registry? And what is other people's business? And the argument that we had inside APNIC about the original version of our policy was all about that. And it was really an issue that as a registry, accuracy underpins the internet because chaos in addresses is crap in a network. We cannot have that.
So that's an interesting lead in to question number two. When you open the Yellow Pages, which is the directory of phone numbers, do you really blame the Yellow Page publisher for the lack of entries under cattle rustler? I mean, or crack dealer, or whatever.
I'm not going to let you assert criminality on behalf of anyone here, so
I'm not.
We're not going to answer that question. That goes beyond the pale.
There are things that are deemed socially unacceptable by the community.
And one of the things in this session, we won't assert criminality on the part of anyone participating.
Okay, I will say no more about cattle rustlers. That may be perfectly legal in some jurisdictions. Okay. However, there are not a lot of entries in the Yellow Pages. We don't blame the Yellow Pages for failing to catalog things that are deemed outside of acceptable behavior. Right? Just because they happen doesn't mean that they should be enabled.
I'm not sure there's a way to answer that. Next question.
Michael Sinatra, Energy Sciences Network. I'd like to take a quick break from policy and just ask Charles a question about what your feel is for the demand out there. If you've got an idea for transfers between regions, do you think that there's a lot of churn or a lot of slack within each region, so you're going to have a lot of business within the region, or do you think there's a significant demand extra-regional, and you think this is going to be a big thing coming up?
If I had to predict the market behavior, I would predict that there will be a migration of number blocks. Number blocks are going to move from where they are to where they're needed, and they're going to do that based on market behaviors and price points and instantaneous demand at any given point in time.
And would you be willing to make any predictions as to which regions they will be leaving and where they will be entering?
Seems obvious.
Well, I think there were some stats which were put up.
I'm going to guess Afrinic.
In the last 2 years, China received 50 million addresses from APNIC. It is the largest single country receiving addresses in recent times. APNIC is unable to give them 50 million addresses in the coming year. That's a pretty clear illustration, I think, at some point, of need outstripping supply dramatically.
Yeah. John?
Can you put up the slide I have on stats real quick?
Yeah, hold on. Sorry.
That one.
This one?
Next one. Next one. One more.
No, please put the other presentation back.
Yep.
This
one more
one?
slide.
Okay.
There's a list of numbers that aren't there, I guess. Okay, go back.
It wasn't in there.
Okay. We've done, go back a slide, maybe it's not there. We've done transfers There's been 75 address blocks transferred within the region based on the current policy. Some of those within Aaron are transactions we've talked about. Some of them are people doing updates. You had a PA block, you had a provider-assigned block, it went to someone, it was a small school, it's no longer associated with you. Part of the transfer policy now allows someone to update those records to actually reflect better information. And in fact, all of the transfers are improving information if they're coming from legacy, because a lot of legacy holders haven't updated their records. And the part of having an incentive for people to transfer is resulting in those address blocks being updated, because part of doing a transfer is making sure the appropriate holder is coming to us and getting it registered to the right holder who's the recipient. So in fact, transfers are improving the quality of the database. Not in the case where the size of the block is larger than policy. We all have said that. But I just want to say, transfers will over time, at least those within policy, improve the quality of the database.
Avi, next question.
Statement, clarification, and a question. Statement is, I think Joel's point about renting is right on. I've had a number of people for about 2 years come to me and say, what do you think about building a market, something to enable transfer, something to help? But I really think the renting may be just the simplest thing. It's the least controversial. It's easy on the routing table space.
You can swip.
You can do a lot of interesting things with DDoS mitigation and performance and whatever. Clarification is the questions about Aaron. I don't feel that I'm necessarily represented, but I am invited. And the reason that I'm not represented is because it seems like an overwhelming amount of work to participate, to form a knowledgeable enough opinion on an ongoing basis, to have a conversation with someone who's a representative and even understand, which leads to my question. So the right-hand side of the panel thinks that needs and community policy should just go away because the market is the rightness of it.
That was not it. The left-right thing was not
Okay,
intentional.
and we're not saying left is.
I just sat at this microphone because it was warm.
I don't believe that either
And
way.
I'm not out on it because David has actually been very silent and doing work or something. I'm not representing the opinions of the right-hand side of the panel either. But the two gentlemen on the left-hand side definitely have. My question as sort of, would you gentlemen do my homework for me, is if I wanted to drive the result of having the community opinion as represented from the members through the AC and the decisions which become policy, if I wanted the result that the policy is that Aaron just represents in a database and the market rules, what would be necessary? Would it be unanimity of the membership of the AC? What would have to happen for either pre-exhaustion or post-exhaustion for the policy to be the market?
So that's actually a great question. This room is sizably twice the size of an Aaron meeting in terms of attendees. I'm approximating. And it would not take much to have participation, not even on-site, remotely, if any percentage of this room decided that the need policy should go from 24 months to 36. Or the need policy should be stripped away and transfers to any operator should be allowed. Or there should be no assessment of anyone. Anyone with money should be able to receive numbers. This room could easily sway that in Aaron if people here feel a certain way. Regarding your renting, I just want to say, right now, we would ask you if you were the recipient of a number block, Avi, have you got a network infrastructure? Are you going to route this? Are you going to actually use it for providing internet services to parties? You might have to be very careful, because if you say my sole purpose is to rent out these in sub-blocks, we probably wouldn't see that as an operational need.
But John, what happens
I
frequently?
would provide connectivity.
Yeah.
There'd be tunneled connectivity, so there would be a connectivity relationship.
I'm just going to let everyone know we have about 4 minutes left. We're already heading into a couple minutes of overtime. So
We'll
start
wind this
wrapping
up. So, but something that happens very frequently, John, is folks will, I don't know who might do this, but someone might get a T1 from a carrier because they've got a block that they don't want to number out of, and there's no actual bits going across that link. And that happens like a lot. I mean, everyone knows that happens. Is that within Aaron policy? I'm not that there's anything you can do.
Yeah, we track that all the time. If you were purely renting out numbers, if you were purely renting out numbers with no actual operational need for them, then that wouldn't meet the operational need policy, would it?
Excuse me, does that mean that you don't meet your own needs since all you do is lease numbers?
Okay, that's nice. Next question. Okay.
Yes.
Next question.
Ron Bonnick, Ron Bonica, Juniper Networks, but speaking for myself. The left-hand side of the room has said that in the market-based exchange, needs assessment it's something that you're not qualified to do and just can't do, so you don't do it. Would you take that to the extreme, to the point that, a single large speculator or maybe a government could buy a big address block that it's not going to use itself?
I could see that happening, actually. What's to keep the government of China
All markets are subject to attempts to distort them, whether it's the stock exchange, real estate, or any other form of market. And most markets are regulated to some extent or another. In arguing that the registry should not be the instrument of market regulation, don't confuse that with arguing that there should be no regulation whatsoever. I think that regulation serves the interests of all participants, including future participants. But who should be the regulator of such a market and transactions, I think, is an open question. But I am saying, if you set up a registry as such a thing, we run into a problem. How many route registries does this world operate? 1? No. 2? No. 5? No. 20? More. Which is the right one? And we've seen presentations in this community about the differences and contradictions that exist amongst the varying routing registries that you folk and others operate. We cannot sustain that in an address registry. If we have chaos, conflicting, and in essence contradictory information, we're stuffed. How do we preserve that is really the question before us. And I'm arguing, I think, not the absence of regulation in markets. Just don't make the registry the one tool you have to try and correct such behaviour.
Okay, we have to move on, unfortunately. Next question.
Hi, Leslie Carr, Wikimedia Foundation. So I wanted to say, Charles had mentioned previously that being a voting errand member, only having IP addresses was sort of creating a haves and have-nots. However, me and Wikipedia is a nonprofit, feel that monetary need may not be the only, your ability to pay for an IP address may not be your only way to determine your need. As we don't have a lot of money yet. We run Wikipedia, we have a large need. And I would just ask everyone to please take companies like us into account.
Okay. Next question.
And again, with Impulse Advanced Communications, we're a regional ISP. The couple of questions that came up, one of them was, do you feel that you are a part of AARON? I do feel that I'm a part of AARON, just like I feel that I'm an American citizen. However, sometimes dealing with AARON is like dealing with the IRS. We've grown through mergers and acquisitions, and trying to jump through all the hoops to get us as one entity, we've basically given up. We just, we're still 4 internet companies as far as AARON is concerned, because it's just been impossible to do that. The other question that came up was the difference between the registry and reality. The registry has to be reality. Just like the Yellow Pages and the NANPA telephone number space, these numbers have to be unique and there has to be an authority. And just like dealing with the IRS, you don't like it, but it's got to be there. I think it's better than an alternative, and I don't really want to see access to the internet handed over to speculators.
Okay.
Thank you. And
we're just going to take these last 2 questions. John, did you want to comment on that?
Thank you. And there's an AARON help desk, and I will get someone to you so you don't have to give up on that merger.
Okay.
Sylvie Laperrière, Google. I have a question for the IRs over there. We have a finite pool of addresses. We've all known it, and your job is to allocate the pool. You've done a fair job of allocating. Part of that, of allocating a public good, because I really don't think it's your property. IP space is not a property. To me, it's like Spectrum. Well, manage it. Take it back. Those who don't use it, take it back. There shouldn't have been a market in the first place for the Nortel block.
Okay.
That has been, the taking back of unused address space has been discussed in the Aaron region. Over time, the policies have predominantly evolved to policies that support taking it back for fraud or similar purposes. So we don't currently go out and audit people and reclaim their space. I will say that that's somewhat incompatible with having any market. So you pretty much have to get us on one side of that train track or the other. We're presently on the side of a limited market.
Yeah. So last question from Eric. Yeah, Mike?
Eric Osting, Network Utility Force. I'd like to remind everyone that certainly the Nortel space, I believe Charles mentioned, none of the blocks that were transferred were named Nortel. So we need to consider policy and conversations around this that move more towards having the registry be accurate. And that's, I think, critical.
Thank you, Eric. That's a great point. So I want to thank our panelists today. I'd like to thank John Kern from Aaron, who's been a great sport. Thank you, John. I'd like to thank Joel Yeagley from Zynga, Charles Lee from Adrex. Thank you for coming out here. And I'd especially like to thank Jeff Houston. Thank you very much, guys.
We'll be back in about 25 minutes.